Welcome everybody to the City Council workshop of October 11th. Thank you for being here. Ms. Kristen Rush, would you call the roll, please? Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here. And can I have a motion to excuse Mayor Williams, Mr. Pfeiffer?
Yeah, go ahead and make the motion to excuse Mayor Williams from this evening's events.
Thank you. All votes are cast, and that passes 6-0. Mayor Williams is excused from this evening's workshop. Hope he is having fun. All right, so we have a couple of workshops on the schedule. Sub-area planning, Mr. Devon, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. We're going to have Ryan Stachelski lead this presentation. I think we have other members of the Community and Economic Development team here as well.
Council, thanks for having us. Ryan Stachelski, Director of Community and Economic Development. I'm just here to kick it off for our team. Patty McCarthy, who's been with the city for about 2 years, she's our senior long-range planner, is going to talk about the efforts that we are doing in sub-area planning. I just want to do a quick introduction and not go over any of the slides that Patty is going to talk about what is sub-area planning. But the reason why we are in a process of sub-area planning is, as you all know, in 2020 we updated our land development code and have new features of that land development code. One of them is mixed use areas, and those are areas of change, of most change, because they allowed for a variety of uses. So we look at our commercial corridors and we identified that there is a need to go into those commercial corridors and say what at a hyper-local or at a more local level do we want these areas to look like. So we are deeply engaged in a community engagement process in these hyper-local areas to talk to the community, engage them, and Patty's going to go over those first 3 areas that we're working on now and where we'll be going in the future. So I'll turn it over to Patty.
Thank you, Ryan, and good evening. Tonight's presentation is an update of the sub-area planning efforts that have been ongoing for this last year with 3 sub-area plans within the city. And we welcome your input and comments as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please. Is there?
Sorry, we didn't actually. You just say next slide.
Okay.
Oh,
is that all right? Next slide, please. Thank you. The City of Arvada has adopted the comprehensive plan also in 2014, which is the community's shared vision and values. And in addition, it also gives policies and goals that are developed for development in the city. And this is another tool in which to further implement the comprehensive plan and the land development code, as Mr. Stachelski mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Sub-area planning focuses on a specific geographic area, and these areas were identified as mentioned by Mr. Stachelski earlier, and it helps to create a long-term vision for future development and redevelopment in these areas. The process includes community participation and input opportunities through stakeholder committees, community meetings, and workshops. Next slide, please. The first sub-area planning efforts for the city were initiated last year, and those include the Northwest Arvada sub-area plan, Newtown sub-area plan, anticipated to be completed next year. A third sub-area plan, in collaboration with Adams County, also began last year and anticipated to be completed by the end of this year. Additional plans are anticipated to be completed over the next few years. Next slide, please. Multiple communication tools and engagement opportunities are important in this process. Social media, including a voice of the customer video of participants, has been recorded at these meetings and posted on social media. We've had public community meetings, surveys, and dedicated website, among others.
Ms. McCarthy, Councilmember Ford has a question.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Patty. Going back to the other slide where it says other area plans are expected to be completed over the next few years, do we have those areas identified?
We've done some preliminary identification, and those are primarily along the Wadsworth corridor. 80th and Wadsworth is a certain area. I'm trying to think, 72nd and Indiana was one?
We have a number of places,
Yeah, sorry.
places identified. It's really the areas that we put mixed-use zoning, and so some of them are 64th in Indiana, 64th in McIntyre, Warden 64th, 80th in Wadsworth, 64th in Wadsworth. Those are the areas that we can imagine seeing the most significant change. In our stable neighborhoods, we don't necessarily anticipate stable change because they're stable, or significant change because they're stable neighborhoods. So these are really around commercial corridors that we anticipate doing these sub-area plans.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Next slide, please. The initial sub-area plans to show how these areas are distributed throughout the city right now. There's the Northwest Arvada plan, appropriately named in the Northwest Arvada area. Then there's the Newtown Area sub-area plan, which is just south of Old Town, between the G-Line Railroad to I-70. And then the Square Lake plan, that is a collaborative effort with Adams County, is on the east side of the city near Sheridan Boulevard. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, this is a collaborative effort with Adams County, and it is also a plan that is being prepared by the consulting firm of MIG Inc. And I would like to now introduce Andrew Rutz, who's one of the project managers who will be presenting the update for the Square Lake area plan.
Thanks, Patty. Good evening. Thank you all for having me. As Patty mentioned, my name is Andy Rutz. I'm a Director of Planning and Design Services with MIG. And we've had the privilege of, despite being in the middle of a pandemic, getting to work with the city and the county on this really exciting sub-area project. As Patty mentioned, we kicked it off kind of at the tail end of 2020. I'd say we're probably 3/4 of the way or so through the process. And I'll orient you in a minute to the study area itself. But you know, at the core of all of these plans is really community engagement. And even despite the limitations that the pandemic has kind of placed upon us in terms of connecting with some of the community members, we've tried to be really creative in how we can both outreach to residents, to folks who live and work in the area, who visit the area, and then also a set of both technical advisors and kind of key stakeholders. So what you see on the screen right here is that we have a technical advisory committee. It's comprised of about 15 individuals. There's folks from the city, from the county, the kind of more technical experts from both of those, folks from CDOT, from RTD, Mile High Flood District, Berkeley Water and Sanitation District. On our stakeholder advisory committee, we have about 32 folks, and that's a mix of residents, local business owners, which you'll see a lot of this area has a really robust set of local businesses. There aren't a ton of residents, especially in the city of Arvada portion of the study area, but we're fortunate to have a number of those residents on this committee, and they've been able to meet with us 6 times through the process. And then we've had a handful of open house events. The first of those was entirely virtual. We held it in an evening in February, and then followed that up with an online survey where Patty, the project manager from the county side, Layla Bajlan, and members of our consultant team pre-recorded videos so that if folks weren't able to attend that open house, they could kind of get a sense of that as they went through the survey. And then we were fortunate to have 2 in-person events, the first of which was in June, and that was an open house at Clear Creek Valley Park. And the second, we were able to piggyback on the City of Arvada Days, also in Clear Creek Valley Park, with a booth there, and had a really strong turnout. Next slide, please. So to give you a sense of this study area, and I believe in your packet there's a much more kind of exhaustive, detailed set of slides if you're interested after this evening. The boundaries of the project itself are 60th Avenue to the north, Tennyson to the east, 52nd Avenue to the south, and Sheridan to the west. And there's a lot of really interesting constraints along the site that I'll touch on, but hopefully what you can see kind of readily apparent from the map itself is that we've got a number of both natural and then constructed barriers that kind of cut through the site. So there's Clear Creek itself running east-west, there's I-76, and then there's the rail just south of kind of what we've called the G line area. And then the site overall also has a lot of floodway and floodplain challenges. Not a lot of those occur in the city of Arvada itself. There is a little bit of a 100-year floodplain in the northeastern part, just above 58th Avenue. You can see that kind of cuts through the northern portion of what we've called the central area. Another interesting piece of this is that it's cross-jurisdictional, which makes it, an exciting project in that we're both serving the community's needs, but also promoting collaboration across the jurisdictions. So from 60th down to 58th, and you can see that it jogs slightly where that dashed line is, that's all city of Arvada. South of that dashed line is unincorporated Adams County. And then south of 52nd is city and county of Denver, and west of Sheridan is Jefferson County. So it's a really interesting gateway to all these different jurisdictions. And I'd say in terms of kind of identifiable characteristics of each of these areas, the G-line area obviously has the rail stop at it. There's a pretty large surface parking lot immediately adjacent to the rail stop. There's a number of really long-standing, vibrant local businesses, especially on that eastern portion of the G-line area. And then there's a number of residential properties along the south side of 60th, so the north side of our site. In the central area then, in the city of Arvada portion of it, it's largely light and heavy industrial uses. South of the city of Arvada portion, there's a number of other industrial uses that is in unincorporated Adams County. There's a trucking business, there's a sand and gravel processing plant kind of abutting the creek itself. And then in the southern area, we have a really strong residential neighborhood. It's the Berkeley Village Mobile Home Park, and there's a stretch of commercial that fronts Sheridan itself. The other thing I'll mention is that the southeast portion of the study area is kind of up on a plateau, and there's a number of single-family and multifamily residences along 52nd and Tennyson there. Next slide. So this evening, I'm just going to give you a quick sampling of some of the recommendations that have been under development. As I mentioned, I believe that the slides in your packet have a kind of a more extensive look at those. And in particular, tonight, I want to spend time focusing on the city of Arvada portion. Once we get the plan to a full draft state and we're coming before you for adoption, we can certainly kind of paint the whole picture with all the recommendations that will come for the county as well. But this evening, what I really want to focus on were the preferred future land use concept that's come out of this, and then improvements that'll be recommended along the perimeter roads in particular. So what you probably noticed on that last slide is that this site is really challenged with east-west connectivity. And so most of the residents and locals that we've spoken to have said that when they're visiting the site, especially if they're going to the station, they're really navigating the perimeter of the site. There's no real way to go from, say, the Berkeley Village neighborhood to the south straight north without moving out to Tennyson and Sheridan to get you there. And so a lot of the streetscape improvements really focus on that perimeter, trying to make it safer, more multimodal, so friendlier for bikes and pedestrians. And then I also wanted to touch on the G-line area itself, and I can get into a little more detail on that when we get to the land use map. Next slide. So in terms of a future land use scenario, as you may be aware, in 2007, the city of Arvada had created a station area framework plan, and that looked strategically at a number of these transit stops and the corresponding investment and development opportunities that could happen adjacent to that. When the city did its comprehensive plan, it largely carried those recommendations forward, and that's what's currently adopted policy. So we were really lucky that we had that as a foundation to kind of start from. It's a little bit easier than trying to dream this from scratch. It also helps that, as I mentioned, a number of our stakeholders on the committee are local business owners. So we had really strong advocates for folks who really wanted to stay in the place. And then I'd also mention that the comp plan itself, this is really one of the only industrial areas identified within the city. There's a really strong confluence of those types of uses. So what you see both on the map to the left and then the breakout to the right that zooms in specifically on the city of Arvada portion is really representative of largely carrying that vision forward at this point and adding a little bit more nuance to it to try to, better strike the balance of what residents and property owners are looking to see kind of the evolution of this area be for the next 20 or 30 years. So in the G-line area, again, north of the rail, you see, and this piggybacks on Ryan's comment from before, a mixed-use area to the east, and then mixed-use residential with a little bit of mixed use on that western half. The real differentiation is that we've heard a lot from the community that if that surface lot adjacent to the station were to redevelop, folks would really like to see that be a residential redevelopment, predominantly with maybe, if it's possible, to get like a cafe or coffee shop or something right against the station. And then south of the rail, the future land use scenario that's kind of emerged really represents kind of a continuation of what the city sees there now. So opportunities for those businesses that have been there, in some cases for 3 or 4 generations, to continue on and also evolve with their needs. So you can see a handful of images to the right that kind of indicate what our stakeholders, what the community, and what the technical advisory committee has really tried to inform in terms of the built form itself. So as you know, residential development, industrial development can come in all shapes and sizes. So what the plan would likely be recommending is something kind of a 3 to 5 story nature north of the rail. I had mentioned that I'd touch on kind of the topography or the unique constraints of the G line. If you visited there, you know that that 60th Avenue and Sheridan are kind of high points, and the station's kind of nestled down underneath there. And we actually heard that a lot from the community, sort of a surprise that, oh my gosh, that's where it is. I never know how to get there. And so, this would be an opportunity to add a little bit of density by the station, and it wouldn't go wholly unnoticed, but it's about 35 feet below that 60th Avenue line. So you could get 3 stories or so, and you wouldn't really prevent views that folks have from 60th out south or towards the mountains. Next slide. And I'm also happy to take any questions as we go. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. I believe this is the last one, though. So in terms of those streetscape improvements, I had mentioned our focus, as you can see on the map on the left, has really been around that perimeter of this site. The city of Arvada already has a couple projects in the pipeline, which is, again, like a great foundation to build from. So I'll start with that one. It's the east side of 60th Avenue, so between Wolf and Tennyson, and it's a bikeway project. So you can see that's the street section that's denoted as planned, and you can see that what's planned is a 2-way bike facility, which would really help to bridge that gap from folks who are on Tennyson, maybe they're using Clear Creek Valley Park, Jim Baker Reservoir, and they want to get to and from the station. The challenge is that there isn't really a proposed alternative then from Wolf to Sheridan. So that would be something that this plan could take the opportunity to recommend. That's what you see under in between existing and planned would be that proposed connection from Wolf to Sheridan. And then Sheridan right now is not really a very friendly environment for pedestrians. So most of the improvements there are really to try to, widen sidewalk opportunities, whether that is over the bridge and or if there's redevelopment that comes along the Sheridan frontage in the central area or in the southern area to ensure that development comes along with comfortable facilities for folks.
Mr. Rutz, Councilmember Simpson has a question.
Certainly.
Thank you, Your Excellency. For those of you who don't know, since it's Mayor Pro Tem Miller's last chance at the mayor's dais, we'll be giving her fun nicknames tonight.
I like it.
Just in terms of, first off, agreed, Sheridan is not pedestrian friendly at all, so highly, highly supportive of anything that can be done to just clean that up and make it safer for everyone, cars, pedestrians, bicyclists alike. I'm looking over at Councilmember Pfeiffer as well, because I know CDOT would have something to do with that as well. In terms of the parking, you mentioned looking over at mixed-use residential for where the parking lot may be now. Would we be losing parking spaces, or would we be doing perhaps structured parking in order to recoup those? Because my initial thought is I would hate to, well, I mean, I would love to add like opportunities for people, but I would hate to increase the vibrancy and attractiveness of this area only to give them nowhere to park.
It's a great question. So you may know that right now RTD is kind of looking system-wide at all of their parking lots that they own, and they've done an evaluation, I believe it was in February, of the utilization of those lots. And I'd say on the whole, they've found that the lots they have way more capacity than they have demand. And so they've demonstrated an interest to be really strategic about redeveloping those lots. They've identified it, I would say admirably, as an opportunity for more attainable or affordable housing. Folks who probably don't have vehicles, who could live directly adjacent to transit and take advantage of it. That said, oftentimes when you would redevelop a park and ride lot in particular, it would be a joint development partnership with RTD, and they certainly would want to retain a good chunk of that structured parking.
Yes, exactly. That was actually going to be my next question, would be what is RTD's stance and position, or do they have one yet?
So we have RTD representation on our technical advisory committee, and they've been really excited about the process. I think they see this as a really good candidate. I think it is, in part probably because the station's a little hidden, that it is underutilized. And so this would be a way, I think dual purpose to provide some new housing opportunities for the city. It also would help boost the ridership potentially at that station for RTD.
Yes, that station absolutely is a little underutilized, I know, because I've used it many times. My one cautionary thought is, and this is a long time in the future, and it's not something that is determined, so please do not quote me on social media here. Rather, if and when we ever did look at paid parking in Old Town, my sentiment is that some people, out of protest, will move to the more adjacent stations, i.e. Gold Strike and Arvada Ridge, which is in Mr. Marriott's district. And so my thought there is, I don't want to shortchange ourselves if more people are going to be boosting ridership over here and coming over here. But with any potential development over there, I'm sure we can find a partnership where that would be considered and developed appropriately.
Thanks, that's a great note.
Thank you. Back to you, your benevolence.
Okay, so I'll jump really quickly through the rest of these kind of streetscape improvements. And the last part I'll speak to is the access to the station itself. So I think the last of those improvements that I hadn't touched on yet is Tennyson on the east side. And the challenge with Tennyson is that we have a really constrained right-of-way. And we've got great park amenities to the east, that we've got existing development to the west, so there's not a lot of space to kind of manipulate or add facilities to it. So these would be pretty strategic improvements. They're trying to essentially make the sidewalks just wide enough where they're comfortable, see if we can add a bike facility on each side, at least to connect down as best we can to Clear Creek. Right now, there is an improvement that's already on the books for I guess it's an overpass technically at Clear Creek where Tennyson goes over the creek, for a new bridge and for better connections on and off that trail at that location. Another thing that our plan would recommend is underpass improvements for I-76, both on Tennyson and on Sheridan. A lot of times that's a safety issue, and I'd say the kind of easiest thing to point to is darkness and just kind of a lot of blind corners. So there's ways either through public art or better lighting to kind of activate that, get more eyes on the space. And then in terms of access to the station itself, I had mentioned the topography disparity that we have in the G line. And so even if we can get the improvements to Sheridan for pedestrians and cyclists, they still have to navigate all the way up to 60th, make their way east, and then come south down the kind of ring road where Wolf dead ends into 60th. And so this recommendation does represent a bit of an investment, but in short term, the idea would be to try to kind of bifurcate that stretch of Sheridan and get an elevator, a stair, something that gets you from Sheridan down to the station area. Oftentimes, that's the kind of thing that comes along with redevelopment. So it would certainly serve RTD riders as well as residents there. So you see that arrow in kind of red-orange, and then in blue, what you see is a multi-use trail connection. So if we're able to get potential riders or residents down from Sheridan more comfortably, then we still need to get them the rest of the way to the station. So a multi-use trail that could kind of abut that potential redevelopment would be a way to comfortably and safely get people across. And then the last two arrows you see are really long-term. So again, this would be 20, 30, maybe even longer out. The green being if that eastern edge were to redevelop, try to get it a similar type of kind of rail to trail connection along the southern edge of that as it exists now, kind of commercial, local business set of properties to better connect you to Tennyson, again, so you don't have to navigate along the perimeter roads. And then the yellow is, I'd say, kind of the Cadillac most lofty option, which would be a pedestrian bridge that would actually cross the rail and connect you from the G line to the central area. That is one thing that's in the station area framework from 2007 right now. So this would represent carrying that idea forward. I will say that the biggest challenge to that right now is most of the uses south of the rail aren't really great transit rider candidates. It's a lot of uses that have trucks, that need trucks for their day-to-day business, and so a lot of folks are driving in with their trucks, driving out with their trucks, and they probably wouldn't increase ridership in a huge way. That said, if we can do a better job of connecting north-south across this entire study area, well into the future, maybe that type of investment would prove out.
Mr. Ross, we've got a couple of questions. We'll start with Councilmember Simpson.
Thank you, Your Ladyship. So, let's see here. I was going to change topics a little bit and go back to safety. I've heard from resident concerns about, and again, you had mentioned lighting and things like that. And so I note that there have been some safety concerns from residents in this community about, transients on and off the off the trains. And then I had one constituent upset that somebody was in their backyard. And which could be very scary for any family. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about how these improvements could improve, just like you had noted, lighting, eyes on the area and whatnot, just in terms of how they could improve safety in the area for our community.
Great question. I'll kind of probably use your same words back at you. I think the biggest in communities we've worked in is really creating more eyes on the street and more activity in these areas. So I think a lot of times the safety concerns are paired with kind of an inactivity or a sense of kind of desertion in these areas, and that's largely what this transit station kind of feels like, even at peak hours. And granted, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'd say the data is skewed right now, and there are still a lot of questions as to going forward what ridership will look like. But historically, it's been a relatively underutilized station. And so trying to get more folks who have ownership of the area, which residents, whether they're renters, homeowners, there's kind of that civic pride component that folks will kind of look out for each other if we can increase the activity there. Same goes with lighting, trying to be intentional about not having blind corners. If we were to get that type of east-west investment for a multi-use trail, it would be something that would want to come along with pedestrian scale lighting so that all hours of the day there's really clear visibility along that and nothing obstructing views of folks watching out for each other.
Perfect. And then just another thought on a different kind of safety. Crossing Sheridan can be quite an intimidating thing. So I know we talked a little bit about that here, but anything we can do, even Cadillac options, should definitely be looked at for feasibility just to ensure that our pedestrians and families are at heights of safety, because I know Sheridan, it's even scarier than Wadsworth.
Agreed. One thing I will mention, because this does get to the crossing portion, is one of the biggest challenges of this site, amongst others, is the connection of Ralston into Sheridan.
Yes.
And it's really compounded on the east side because there are so many trucks, and at peak hours those trucks are trying to navigate a really tight hairpin turn. So that is something on the county portion of the project that we'll be recommending is a reconfiguration of that intersection, which would allow for better signal timing and things for pedestrians. That said, there's not a lot of pedestrians that are crossing at that point, but it doesn't force you to walk, north a mile to make that crossing. So anything that gives folks another opportunity.
I absolutely agree, and I do think you're right that there's not a lot of people doing it, but a lot of people don't do it because it is so intimidating. If we had a good connection point across Sheridan, I think we would see a lot more interest in heading east from the west.
That's a great point.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jones.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question on, and maybe it's just my understanding is not sufficient enough, but looking at both Sheridan and Tennyson, there's varying degrees of right-of-way width. What challenges does that present with even the proposed outcomes?
It's a great question. So the biggest challenge is a continuous facility, because at the end of the day, we're playing the math game, particularly on Sheridan, in that it's a CDOT facility. CDOT has their own set of rules and regulations that they abide by, independent of whether the city or the county were to say, we feel like we can tighten this up. That said, they've been a really good partner in this process. They do feel like they have concerns that they need to help mitigate along Sheridan. On the Tennyson side, it's got a little bit more of a neighborhood character to it. And I would say that traditionally our biggest challenge for getting that continuity of a facility is juggling both jurisdictions' competing interests. So we're fortunate that we've got folks on both sides of the city and the county in this case, collaborating to try and find that common ground. You may have noticed, if you're looking at the dimensions, the section of Tennyson then from basically the city of Arvada portion to I-76 is where we're really most constrained. Right. And so typically we would prioritize keeping that bicycle facility contiguous and consistent because they're traveling at a slightly higher speed, there's a greater risk for injury if there is a conflict, and then we'd reduce the pedestrian throughway or the sidewalk in this case.
So just to follow up to that, more on the Sheridan facility, given that there's multiple agencies involved, and it's good to hear that they're interested in kind of what the ultimate outcome could be, it's always going to come down to funding. And has there been any discussion in your technical study group about how this would prioritize, say, in a CDOT funding project?
So oftentimes the CDOT prioritization is kind of cyclical, and it comes oftentimes with kind of bond asks. And so if we could get it on a regional prioritization, which this plan would basically signal that need, it would go on CDOT's regional prioritization, and then hopefully city and county would concurrently prioritize that and be able to access like grant funding and things from CDOT more readily once it's available.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
I think you'll go through a STIP or a TIP process, which Dr. Cog would have to weigh in, and then subregions would weigh in, and then they could prioritize this as a route to be addressed. So that's one option. So I want to go back a little bit around, I guess what I'm confused about is we're doing this joint thing with Adams County. I don't know if we've ever done that with another county before. So I'm really trying to understand what the genesis is and why we would do some joint planning all the way down to 52nd Avenue.
Councilmember Pfeiffer, I can at least help answer that question.
Sure.
The genesis started with property owners having expressing a number of concerns to both city and county team members, including myself and the county manager for Adams County, Ray Gonzalez. And after considering these concerns that the property owners had, we concluded that we should do a joint sub-area planning effort. And in the case of some of the expressions of concern that were submitted to Adams County, it did incorporate the area down to West 52nd Avenue, which was that wasn't necessarily on our menu of things to do, but it was something that Adams County felt like they wanted to do. We felt like since we were looking at the entire area, it was something that we could work on together.
Well, so the reason for my question is, and I'm going to NLC meetings, like when I went to NLC in Seattle, one of the biggest discussions was when you're doing planning, the biggest roadblock for community planning is an interstate. And so why would we even want to talk about anything south of an interstate when we know from an urban development perspective that other than railroads, rivers, and interstates divide communities? And so we're spending a lot of time, doing collaboration with them, but I want to know what the real purpose is when we know there's an interstate between the two communities, and knowing that is not, that's a hard thing. And Globeville's a good example right now with I-70 Central. And now they're mending that community by putting a park on top of the interstate and connecting the communities. But they're going back to right what today could be considered the wrongs. But Seattle had a great use case about I-5 coming through here, going through their communities, and their churches all collapsing because the interstate became a roadblock between communities. Yeah. So I'm not understanding why, unless we're going to annex the area or we're going to do something a little bit bigger. I don't see how the two communities actually fold together.
So I can speak a little bit to that. So when we first embarked on what Mr. Devon talked about, our area of influence where we were interested in was by this map, the central area and then the north area. And the reason why we were particularly interested in the central area is, number one, because of the transportation issue that has been described tonight and has been a topic of conversation for the past 10 years of the businesses in that area. Also, businesses that go to that area oftentimes came to us and wanted to annex in Square Lake. And I won't get into all the details of why that's a good idea or a bad idea or whatever. But so we felt compelled that through the central area and the north area that it really needed to be a collaborative process because it wasn't our jurisdiction to plan, and we wanted to come together. So our initial funding conversation with them was to split that area 50-50. Later on, they came back to us and said, hey, our county commissioners are also interested in this area. Would you mind if we paid extra and added this on so we could have a conversation? We're hiring a consultant, and we wanted to bring them on and understand that area. So it wasn't necessarily our intent to go through a planning process that incorporated the area south of 76. It was more that Adams County saw a benefit of being efficient with a process that was already going on, understanding the area. And so we financially partnered and participated on kind of the area north of 76, and then they had a kind of an add-on option to the bottom because there was a real planning need that they had identified at the county.
I still don't see the linkage between the two areas.
Well,
I'm trying to understand why they had an interest to join in on our project south of I-76. And when we're planning an area like this, you're either looking at how is connectivity working to get to the rail, you're looking at, possible annexation or future land use into the area. I see there's other reasons other than, well, they wanted to jump on our coattails on this, so they just added this in. And they're really two separate areas, and we're not really showing. So I'm trying to figure out what you're trying to paint and pull together that brings that southern area into this conversation.
Other than geography, but you've identified a number of challenges of why that area probably needs to be looked at somewhat separately, but we looked at it because of geography together. But I don't dispute any things that you've talked about in terms of trails and linkages. Those are all challenges for the area.
Because now we can get into the homeless situation. If we want to start, you know what I mean? This thing can start spinning out really out of control. And I really would rather have stayed north of I-76 than try to bring in. And the reason why is because you all are talking about Sheridan and Tennyson being connections, but we're not talking about the trail enhancement that goes with Clear Creek through there. And there's a whole a homeless camp underneath there. And so that brings up a whole different situation, because now I'm going to start bringing up, why are you putting a park right next to it? Because that's one of your drawings. If you go back, you had land use, a whole park right there. So what is that going to do? So now I bring up security. We started talking about safety. And you see that now I feel like this plan's kind of doesn't feel very good for me right now of what you're trying to do here or propose. I'm just lost.
Okay.
Because I get the north side, I get that. I don't get why we're tied in with the south side. I get the central because there has been talk about annexation and some others. But I think what throws me is south of 76. The fact that it's even in the lines of this discussion is throwing me.
Okay.
So, I mean, I hope that they're not influencing our plans and we're not influencing theirs. But right now, because I don't see us in any way going annexing south of I-76.
We have no intention of that.
Okay.
And I think, you know, maybe we were just being a little bit too gracious, but we saw, I think, an opportunity to react to a request, and we wanted to try to be a good partner as we worked through this.
And I appreciate it, but we have to have a clear mission of what our roles are and role clarity, because you're going in front of two elected bodies and we're trying to, you know, do some comprehensive planning together, and you see how well it works in Wheat Ridge. You look how, we can name a couple different places that it has either failed or we haven't done it, and this is just adding confusion. So as long as we have role clarity around who's doing what and who's advocating for what money, and I don't want to be at the sub-region in ADCOM or Adams County, and we're talking about something that they get all the money and then all of a sudden we get screwed in the north side of it because we're saying, well, we're going to take care of this because your plan said we could do this. I guess you guys don't know the politics of the money of the sub-regions,
No.
but it's all of us going after money, and it's going to be whoever the 800-pound gorilla is in the room that ends up winning, which is usually the county. So I'm trying to just understand our role into this whole thing. I would just recommend that, obviously, if we stay in the central and the north area, like you said, I would have preferred us not even bringing it up or even showing this on a map. And I'd like to understand more about Clear Creek's involvement in this whole thing too. So I'm giving you guys feedback on this, but I also, because if we're talking about connectivity, I'm curious why we would even propose a bridge, which, you know, those are expensive. We can't even get one for Ralston High School, which has been begged for a dozen years. But yet we're going to throw one here for a population that may not use it unless we're talking about the communities in the southern area. And that's why I'm confused on what is the intent of that southern area. Is it to use the RTD station? Is that something we're trying to solve for here at the city of Arvada? Or, you know, are we building infrastructure to cater to a community down south, or are we trying to try to focus on the community up north? Just want to know where our boundaries are. So I don't know if I'm looking for a response. I'm just making a statement around it. That's all I have, Your Highness. Appreciate it.
This is going to be a long night. Mr. Rutz, I don't have any other lights on. Please feel free to continue.
Okay. I believe that's kind of the tail end of what I was intending to present. I could, I guess, make mention of that future land use and the park use on the south portion of the central area. The rationale behind that is largely because most of the central area is in the 100-year floodway, and the 100-year floodway is largely undevelopable without a pretty significant investment. And there's also the existing use in that location is that sand and gravel processing plant. So there'd be a lot of mitigation even on top of the floodway mitigation. It's also, a portion of it's in a flammable gas overlay and a landfill overlay. And so looking way into the future, if that business were, you know, no longer interested in operating, one of the kind of most successful uses might be to let it become an extension of that trail corridor. And I know Arvada has plans, the county has plans to kind of promote the green spines along these corridors. And so this was an opportunity to be able to add some kind of amenitization along that trail frontage. Again, you know, probably at the tail end of the horizon of a plan like this.
You're lighting it up tonight. So Councilmember Ford, let's go ahead and start with you.
So is there, since there already is some industrial in this area, is there any thought to possibly a design of a business park or something like that where people might travel the train to work as opposed to traveling away somewhere else to work?
It's a great question. So in the future land use scenario that's been kind of developed to this point, the east side we're shown as industrial. The west side so basically just north of 58th and south of 58th on the west side is shown as industrial office. And there would be language in the narrative that would support an idea like that. If, businesses decide to move out, if property owners decide to redevelop, that would be an option that's on the table along with the palette of uses within industrial uses as well. And that could be the type of thing that would help to justify that type of investment for a pedestrian bridge. But again, I'd reiterate that right now, an expense like that doesn't make a lot of sense with the existing uses. And we've asked those property owners and business owners, like, would you like to see that? And they've fairly candidly said no, because we just would never use it. And so we wanted to make sure that the city and the county had, the kind of the aspiration in a plan, in a policy document, so that if and when circumstances change going forward, there's a line on a map that shows that this was something that had some interest within the community, albeit well into the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Pfeiffer, back to you.
So in this proposal, are you asking to change the zoning?
No, we are not.
No, not right now, but it's not the zoning that we match now, right? Because it's MXT is what I see on our zone maps online.
Okay.
And this is showing something different, industrial light. So are you looking at mixed residential-ish thing going on here?
So MXT allows for residential in this area. I'm not looking at the zoning map. And then I don't believe that we changed the zoning in the other areas there in the city. So we have the IG and IL.
So I see IL and I see MXT in the area, and that's it.
Okay.
So there is a suggestion here that we would look for some sort of other use north of the tracks than IL, because there is IL on the north of the tracks.
Okay.
I'm just asking, is that the intent of the presentation tonight?
No.
Okay, is the intent to give us an idea of what it could look like?
Yes.
And so within that presentation, it's showing that your suggestion is to possibly look at the zoning in this area differently than what we've already done recently.
What we're talking about is that through a community engagement process, this is what the community is saying, what their desire is for a future land use. So we're reporting back what we've had in a community engagement process. We're not proposing the
any
specific
proactive changes or anything like that.
We're doing long-range planning to understand what the community voices in this area.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. That's all I have.
I don't have any other lights on. Go ahead.
That's all I had for you this evening, so thank you so much. As I mentioned, I'll be back again once we have a full draft plan and a set of recommendations. And again, I would encourage you, it sounds like a number of you already have taken a look at the kind of more extensive set of slides, but if you have some downtime and some interest, I'd encourage you to take a look at those as well. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Next slide, please. So the Newtown sub-area plan is the second sub-area planning effort. I wanted to give a quick update tonight. The purpose statement is there below the slide. Kind of explains this is a long-term vision and implementation plan to encourage and promote and support sustainable community development in this area. Next slide, please. The Newtown area, first of all, there's a correction on this slide, and my apologies for any confusion. It says 0.41 acres for the study area and 0.77 acres for the influence area. That should be, rather than acres, it should be 0.41 square mile, which does equate to a little over 260 acres. The Newtown subarea is generally defined in the areas along Wadsworth Boulevard and bypass between the G-line tracks and on the north and Interstate 70 on the south. The Arvada Marketplace along West 52nd Avenue will also be included in this study area. The study area is shown on this map in the red line areas with the perimeter influence area highlighted in blue shaded areas on this map. The draft general focus elements that have been developed and we will continue to develop with input from the public at this time are redevelopment, connectivity, housing, parking, placemaking, and traffic. Next slide, please. Community engagement is an important component of developing these plans. Thus far, we've held 3 community meetings where participation varied from 17 to 50 persons in attendance. We've created Speak Up Arvada surveys to follow up with those community meetings so that we can get more input from persons in the community who have not attended. And then we've held several technical and steering committee meetings as well. Next slide, please. During these community meetings, the comments are summarized on this slide. However, there are many more comments that are on our website if you're interested in all those comments. We received this input from the meetings themselves, our Speak Up Arvada website, and also any emails that have been sent to us. I'll just highlight a few of them. The Newtown area, the community has identified that retail and commercial redevelopment and commercial development is very important to this area. Especially there's a need for a grocery store. They asked that smaller scale development would be encouraged in this area to also encourage small businesses to come to the area, as the retail component of this area is very important to the city and to the community. Walkability and connectivity, the area amenities. There was suggestions specifically over Wadsworth Boulevard. That is a major bisection of a roadway and interstate through this area, and a lot of concerns with public safety and pedestrian safety and access over Wadsworth Boulevard. And then there were also comments about desiring mixed income and diverse housing options in this area. In addition, they wanted appropriate parking in the area, concerns with Wadsworth Boulevard bypass and traffic, improved pedestrian and vehicular connectivity, and again, as mentioned earlier, bicycle and pedestrian safety. Next slide, please. The existing zoning in this area is mixed-use transit, and that has varied maximum heights allowed throughout the area. The lower heights are from the G line, and then they increase as they go closer to Interstate 70. Development opportunities in the study area also could include redevelopment of existing land uses, either on underutilized properties or existing properties, potential intensification of densities, both commercial and residential. Community and committee feedback that we've heard to date to guide the redevelopment in this area included retail, commercial businesses, and development was very important to the community and the committees, and there was a need for attainable housing, and multifamily was considered important in this area as well. Potential character context areas were created and shown on the map to further identify potential uses within the study area. We felt it was important to kind of geographically identify certain areas to get more specific input on uses and architectural design and form in this area. The character area A is the red area, and that's on the west side, just west side of Wadsworth Boulevard bypass, just south of Old Town Arvada in the G line. On character area B is the orange area, just on the east side of Wadsworth Boulevard and north of West 52nd. And the area C is the green area, just on the west side of Wadsworth Boulevard, and includes Lowe's, Home Depot, and Costco, the major retail areas in that retail development in those areas. And then the potential character area D is the purple area, primarily that's south of 52nd Avenue, the Arvada Marketplace area, and then further east is character area E, identified in yellow. The open house participants at our last meeting specified that the most appropriate predominant land use for these character areas were character areas A, B, and C, which are the red, green, and orange areas. They felt what the pedestrian-oriented mixed use was the appropriate predominant land use. Auto-oriented commercial uses were preferred for character area D. And then finally, character area E, the preferred predominant land use was office, light trade, and technical uses.
Ms. McCarthy, Councilmember Simpson has a question.
Yes.
Sorry, it's actually not a question. I just, for those watching at home, I don't know how clear the map is. There was just a quick, you mentioned Lowe's was in the green section. I believe it's actually in the red A section.
Yes, thank
Sorry,
you for
I
that
just
correction.
wanted to clarify. I
Yes.
apologize. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Councilman Simpson. Next slide, please. Another draft focus element that is being considered for the plan is architecture and design for the Newtown study area. Could you please do next slide again, please? Thank you. And utilizing a visual preference survey by comparing buildings in this area, we asked the community to give us feedback of the type of architecture, form, and design they desire for this area. And they initially, at an earlier community meeting, they identified that it was generally important to have one form or design of architecture within the study area. In order to understand what they meant by that, the visual preference survey was given at that time, in which traditional modern architecture, building design, and form with brick, stone, and other natural materials was the overwhelmingly preferred design by the community. And examples of that type of architecture are shown on this slide. Again, we utilized the potential character areas to further refine the appropriate areas that they felt the one type of architecture or form was appropriate. And we asked them to identify specifically the areas if they felt there was consistent architecture and urban design that was appropriate for these areas. In character areas A, C, and D, A, C, and D, they favored that there be one type of consistent architecture and urban design. And in character areas B and E, the overwhelming response was not to have consistent architecture and design in that particular areas. Next slide, please. One of the prominent comments we heard both from the community and committees is that in this area is both an opportunity and a challenge to have the desire for more improved pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, and with that is the safety element as well. A map was created to identify potential locations to help improve these connectivity opportunities. It was developed both by staff and the community, and then the connections were identified using the orange arrows, and then we asked the community to give feedback of potentially some more areas they felt were important for connectivity. And that is reflected on this map with the orange dots in a map exercise we had at our open house. The top potential connections and connectivity opportunities identified by the community at a recent open house included West 56th Avenue and Wadsworth Bypass, West 55th Avenue and Wadsworth Bypass again, and then West 53rd Avenue and Wadsworth Boulevard Bypass. They also I asked for improved connectivity along West 52nd Avenue, and specifically over from the east side to the west side on Wadsworth Boulevard. And then also there was a desire for connection to just south of the RTG line to be able to have better connectivity to Old Town on the north side. Next slide, please. A goal of this planning area, next slide, please. Sorry, I think there's two overlapping here. Thank you. The goal of a planning effort is to identify areas that should be linked together and identify opportunities for community-oriented spaces. This was something that we heard from the community as well, the desire for community open spaces that could also potentially include open space areas such as small urban parks. So we therefore followed up and asked where we felt these urban parks would be appropriate. They're typically privately owned, but in future development, they're required in our land development code, and it's also an element that's been included in the city's Parks and Open Space Master Plan. It is also another tool that can be used and support placemaking opportunities for developments within the Newtown study area. This map, again, was created by staff in the community to show potential opportunities for these connectivity options, and especially to open space areas and small urban parks. So we asked the community to identify where they felt these type of community open space areas and potentially placemaking areas could occur within the study area, and those are identified with the green dots on the map itself. The primary potential urban park opportunities identified by the community were Columbine Lake, which is privately owned property, the northeast corner of 55th Avenue and Old Wadsworth Boulevard, and then thirdly, the south of the RTG line, just west of the Wadsworth bypass. So those are the larger green dots that are shown on the plan. Next slide, please. Another draft element of the Newtown Subarea Plan is parking. We heard from the community really varied comments, is that there was too much parking or not enough parking in this area, and that they felt that appropriate parking was important for future development, and then also to connect and also not affect the residential areas and the area closest to Old Town. At the last community open house, we prompted the question, based on your experience in this area, do you feel the existing parking is excessive, deficient, or adequate? It really was sort of a mixed comment. However, a majority of the respondents thought the parking was excessive, and the next level of response was parking was adequate. Next slide, please. Did you have any questions on the Newtown area before I move on to Northwest Arvada?
I don't see any lights on. You're good to go.
Thank you. The third sub-area plan effort in the city is Northwest Arvada. And again, our purpose is to create a long-term plan to create neighborhood commercial retail development that's cohesive with the existing and surrounding communities along Indiana Street Corridor and Highway 72. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview, the Northwest Arvada sub-area plan is generally located along Highway 72 and along Indiana Commercial Corridor. This area is located both within the city and unincorporated Jefferson County, and the gray areas on this map show the unincorporated Jefferson County areas. The sub-area plan study area are shown in red and will be developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the primary study area located along the Indiana Street Corridor from the railroad tracks to the south and continues north to West 96th Avenue. Phase 2 is located along Highway 72, and it starts at Highway 93 and continues just to the west side of Welton Reservoir along the highway. Next slide, please. Community engagement in this area has so far included 3 community meetings with attendance varying from 30 to 70 persons, Speak Up Arvada surveys again, and multiple technical and steering committee meetings. Public opportunities will be ongoing as we can continue developing these plans. Next slide, please. A quick summary of community comments that we received from this area and participants, specifically the influence areas, were obtained from community meetings and other public opportunities. We heard that, I'll just highlight a few of them, the major comments that we've received. The neighborhood-focused retail and commercial uses, especially restaurants, are desired in this area. More affordable housing options. Also, there was a request and comment for more open space, park trails, and community amenities. And there were mixed opinions about the scale of future development for residential. Also, there was a lot of concerns and comments about improving traffic congestion along Indiana Street Corridor, including to the south where the bridge exists for the railroad near Ralston Valley High School. Also, there was comments about pedestrian and bike access and wanting better connectivity along Indiana Street, and more recently, more concerns about water resource management, sustainability, and drought impacts for the city of Arvada and this community and this area of the city. Next slide, please. The study areas for this sub-area plan, as mentioned earlier, are 2 phases. The primary focus area is phase 1 along the Indiana Street Corridor. Next slide, please. And the second phase is the purple shaded area on here along Highway 72. This portion of the plan will include only land use discussion. Other detailed elements such as urban design connectivity will be determined later. Next slide, please. One of the draft focus elements for the Phase 1 area in the plan is placemaking, and that can mean different things to different people. And the reference that we have utilized thus far is to create a sense of place, defined as a quality place, that are active, unique, interesting, safe, and walkable, and typically with mixed uses. We asked the community a one-word response question: what does placemaking mean to Northwest Arvada? The most popular responses are the larger words on this word cloud, and those were included walkability, open space, community, neighborhood, and restaurants. Additional community and committee input included that there was a desire for community neighborhood amenities and gathering places, placemaking and quality spaces, and then also there was also another comment of the need for this area to identify as part of Arvada. So we followed up with a question asking if they would support installation of potential entry signs at Highway 93 and the North City boundary, in which they responded they would support. Next slide, please. Another draft element of the sub-area plan is land use, and we've heard from the community, again, a desire for more focused neighborhood commercial and retail uses in this Phase 1 area. The sub-area planning team has been focusing on finding ways to create a sense of place with economic influence, including the placemaking tool. And the overwhelming feedback the city has heard from the community is about wanting more local restaurants, shops, and spaces for gathering. The top 3 locations for potential community and commercial place development was identified in previous community meetings, and to further refine that, we gave the top 3 answers to that and asked for more direct input of which one they felt were appropriate for this type of creating a development with commercial and community place. The first site was A on this map, and it included it located on the west side of Candelas Parkway, just west of Indiana Street. The area B is on just south on the southwest corner of Indiana and Candelas Parkway, and then area 3 is generally located on the northwest corner of Indiana Street and West 86 Parkway. The open house community participants selected location B, which is just on that southeast corner of Indiana and Candelas Parkway, with the highest percentage of responses for this type of development. Next slide, please. A goal of the planning effort is also to identify important areas that should be linked together and improve connectivity in this area. The community would like to see in the Phase 1 area more pedestrian and bike trails throughout the area to connect both existing neighborhoods and future development. And then secondly, improve pedestrian safety and connections where there are gaps along Indiana Corridor and Highway 72. Potential future pedestrian and bike connections have been identified on this map, but this is the purple and pink line. And these include an east-west underpass to continue it at West 87th Parkway and Indiana Street, additional sidewalks and trails between West 86 Parkway and Candelas Parkway. We'd also like to wanted to identify future roadway connections in this area, potential ones. There's Jefferson Parkway, which is shown on the plan, and road network between Welton Reservoir and Indiana Street. Next slide, please. In the Phase 2 area, we've inquired about the appropriate land uses with the community, and the existing land uses in this area are industrial, heavy industry, outdoor storage, and a few single homes sprinkled throughout this along Highway 72. It's both developed in City and Jefferson County. Properties in the city are currently zoned general commercial, light industrial, and general industrial as shown on the map. We heard from the community, again, it was more of a mixed, not so quite clearly, that 51% of the community respondents indicated that the existing industrial zoning was not appropriate and for the Phase 2 area. In addition, mixed use had the highest number of responses as the preferred land use for this area, followed by commercial and light industrial as the primary land uses the community would like considered for future development in the Phase 2 area. Next slide, please. I didn't see any lights either. Were there any questions about the Northwest Arvada Park?
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
So any discussion around a bridge between Candelas and Leiden Rock?
Mm-hmm. Yes, where the bridge, there was a lot of desire for connectivity, bike and pedestrian across, that would need to occur across the railroad lines. We have identified that as a comment and a concern, that it would require multi-jurisdictional and also a more long-term implementation of any kind of crossing there. So it is something that has been identified within this process.
And then when you surveyed going back over to the Indiana Phase 1, location A, B, and C were just designators, right? That wasn't some rank stack that we provided. They just gave a designator as A, B, and C, right? Okay.
Yes, and those were created from previous survey from the first community meeting. We had Speak Up Arvada, and there was identification of 8. They had 8 to 12 responses, and we identified the most prominent locations of that responses based on number. So those were the 3 most popular locations that we had feedback from the community as to have these type of developments.
Because I mean, there is an impression out there, because they've all heard it, that location B would be some sort of town center one day, mixed use or whatever. So, you know, I have some comments at the end of this presentation, but we just need to make sure that we steadfast with what the community is expecting. And this just reassures what we've already said once, that location B is critical for placemaking right now. So it's exactly what I've been hearing. You know, the industrial comments going back to Phase 2, I think more than anything right now, just because no one knows what those things are on the side of the road, and so they just get upset with whatever they're doing over there. Mm-hmm. You know, just from my view, I don't know if changing those zonings would work or not. I mean, at the end of the day, we had a plan, and it's completely changed. And in fact, we just met with our fire district partners earlier today, and for them to survive, we have to have some commercial and industrial areas for the proper tax money for them to properly staff their stations. Again, I want to go back to what I've always said about this area is we've got to be very thoughtful and very aware of eroding commercial area, because it gets smaller and it gets smaller and it gets smaller, and the more meetings we have around it, it just seems to continue. So we just need to be clear, if we're doing long-range planning on this, mm-hmm. that you know, it's hard, because I won't be seated here. I don't know who will be seated here in 10 years or 15 years or whatever this plan might be implemented. If it even is implemented. I mean, right now, to me, it's just a pipe dream. Some of the ideas might not come to fruition out of it, but we need to be thoughtful when we start eroding away commercial and, I'm going to even say, industrial areas, where we need to kind of keep some businesses within our communities.
Thank you, and that is a sentiment that has been expressed through our committee participants as well, and that includes property owners, and so obviously they have economic interests in that area, and they have indicated that they would prefer it to stay more commercial industrial. However, there were no specific plans presented, or we were not aware of any that have been quite moving forward, except for, I think there's one development review closer to Highway 70 and 72 in Indiana that may or may not be coming forth.
Yeah, and it was interesting also, one last comment is the community does not feel like it's part of Arvada. I know it's thankful, mm-hmm. The idea of putting a sign would probably be helpful, but I will tell you that community up there does not feel one thing of being part of the city of Arvada. And I think it's because the only thing they get a sense of it is they see fire district coming to calls, and they see that, but you don't always see the police up there, which there's not a lot of crime, but you don't mm-hmm. see the cars patrolling. You don't see city vehicles around that often, so it feels very, very on its own out there. And so any way to make it feel a little bit more inclusive with the city. It is a genuine issue that I hear all the time now that I live up there. You know, so anything we can do to make it feel a little bit better. All the parks have the right signs, so I don't know. It says City of Arvada on all the parks, but any way to continue pushing on that would be a good thing too.
Okay, I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Jones.
I just have to say this because my wife tells me this every time we drive underneath the underpass. She said it would be great if there was a sign that said, "Welcome to Arvada," right there on the underpass sign. So that's, you know, maybe just.
She has incredible ideas. The lights in Old Town, the signage.
Well, I think you should
Let's get on the
incorporate the
planning
town of
commission.
Leiden and make a little town. You'd already have a town center already there.
Again, thank you. The next steps for this process is we will continue with our technical and steering committee meetings. We have a couple scheduled here the next few weeks. We will give feedback. We'll provide them an update as well as what has been going on in our last community meeting. We also are having Speak Up Arvada surveys to follow up with the community open houses and some of these questions to get a little more input from the public. We also will be having the next public community meeting the first part of next year, and first draft of plans and recommendations in the first quarter of next year as well, and hopefully adoption of the plans in mid-2022. And
Councilmember Pfeiffer has another question.
Oh, yes.
Just at the end, when you're ready for questions, I thought you were getting there. I can wait.
Okay, well,
Are you at questions yet or no?
yes, I am actually. Yes.
Well, it's not, I don't have questions. I have more comments for the team as a whole.
Okay.
So maybe help me through this technical process more than anything. I think this is where some of my frustration might be coming out. We've done the land development code or zoning. We've done that. We've issued it just recently. The sub areas that I was very clear about and that I understood when we went through that process was the northwest area only. So these two areas, and maybe my head's been in a hole way too long, but the other two areas seem somewhat new. And I was doing research on this, and the two sub areas seem to have been started this year, from what I've gathered. And so I didn't know if council has how that looks, because in the northwest we talked about PUDs and having everything seen. Is that something we're trying to do down here with these sub-planning areas? Are they going to be handled a lot differently? Like we are in the northwest?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand your question. We're not changing zoning here. What we're doing is just a community engagement process. We identified these areas actually during, I believe, one of the last city council retreats that we had when we talked about this, and we also talked about the idea for sub-area planning in the Newtown area. The Square Lake plan also came along in partnership and conversations that we were having with Adams County because of the reasons already stated. So our intent is not to go in and rezone or proactively rezone or anything like that. It's simply a community engagement process to understand when development does occur, what is the community feedback ahead of that as opposed to being reactive to development that's happening. So we're trying to be proactive here, understand what it is, and then give developers a little bit of guidance. But we're not planning on rezoning anything, and we're not planning on proactively doing anything. This is a listening exercise so that we can be good stewards of the area when development does occur, and that we have community input to help guide future development.
Okay, so I appreciate that comment, but let me use an example that will backfire on us. I'm looking at one of the detailed documents that refers back to the Arvada Station framework. So if we're going to go and promote these plans and communicate engagement, what assurance do we have that will, our community that you've engaged, that these ideas will come to fruition? Because that's what they're going to think. Just like the Arvada Station framework didn't quite pan out exactly as it was in 2007, but you referenced it in your studies. And so you might not agree with me. I know you're shaking your head no. Honestly, I don't care if you agree with me or not. I'm just telling you how I feel about this. This will get into coming back, and if maybe there's a technical question here that you can answer. What assurance do we have that we listen to this, and this is great work, and you do all these studies? what assurance do we have that this would be adhered to, that these things, this infrastructure you're referring to, will be addressed and implemented if such things happen? You know, because it's not in any other document than a study.
Well, our intent is to adopt them and have them be amendments to the comprehensive plan. So they're part of a adopted plan by City Council. That's number one. Number two, just like the comprehensive plan, these are guidelines. These are conceptual plans. The Transit Framework Plan, the 2007 Transit Framework Plan, was never a plan that was saying, like, this is the plan that you have to follow and these buildings need to be here and this. It gave an illustrative example of what it could look like in a certain area, given patterns of development, and it gave examples of things. But these are not supposed to be, these are not intended to be followed verbatim. What they're supposed to be done is conceptualizing different concepts and ideas in an area for different needs that have been identified at a moment in time. So there is absolutely no guarantee, and I will tell you that the only guarantee is these plans will likely not represent exactly what is built at the time. What they will do is they'll give direction and guidance to future planners and council members and developers about what a conversation the community had at a moment in time and what was important to them, and they'll have to then use that as part of the breadth of information that they're using when they make these decisions at some future date.
Okay. I worry about some of this planning we do that doesn't get institutionalized or memorialized through the process. I hear what you're saying, but I think I've been here too long to know that what we say today probably won't happen in 10 years. And so, like, somebody's going to suspect that, hey, you talked about a pedestrian bridge to come over the industrial area one day. You had it in this presentation and this plan, and watch in 10 years, it never happens. And so but yet we changed all the zoning around. We did the mixed use. We did the 3 stories, the 35 feet. We were talking about some very specific things, talking about changing the makeup with CDOT and so forth. But then yet certain elements that might land on our shoulders may not come to fruition. I'm just saying. You don't have to respond or anything. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to always happen that way. And I'd like to get to these points where we could get, really stay focused and because we get excited over these plans and then we just don't come all the way through with them sometimes. And so when I see these things and I get excited, we need to do our best to try to hold the wheel straight. And here's another example. Did you know that Dr. Cog has a whole plan for this area? Did we cross-reference that plan that Dr. Cog had with the MPO?
Are you talking about the Square Lake plan?
Yeah, and Old Town. There is a whole document, 43-page document just on the Gold Line study that was done by the Gold Line Working Group at Dr. Cog. And unfortunately, the city people that were there are not here anymore.
Sure.
Kevin Nichols, I can't remember what's his name from Urban Renewal, and somebody else, but they're not here anymore. So, I mean, when we do this kind of plan, we should still be cross-referencing regional plans to make sure that we're staying.
Part of the planning process every time we do a plan is we start with what plan's already in existence. So that is done in this sub-area planning process. It happened with Square Lake, and that is something that is just planning 101.
Okay, so it's Square Lake and Old Town, because there is a Gold Line corridor.
Right.
So you did cross-reference Dr. Cog's TODs, because they are calling them TODs, but we did not imply that whatsoever at either one of these discussions, actually.
Well, we understand, because the transit framework plan is the TOD plan for these areas that also was part of the planning process that you described. Okay.
Well, as long as I don't want us to reinvent the wheel. Let's try to stay, if we're going to be regionalized, let's make sure we're staying in some continuity between, I appreciate the Adams County relationship, but there's a regional plan too, and not that they dictate what we do. We should at least acknowledge the plan and know its differences if we're not going to follow it, with the region. I'm not saying we're not. I'm not hearing that you guys actually used the working group plan that was given by Dr. Cog. You did?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would just like to add, CDOT has been very active in joining on our committee meetings. So I've been appreciative of that. So they're aware of this process, and there are some efforts to meet with them separately to discuss certain elements, especially for the Square Lake area.
Councilmember Ford.
That excuse me, that makes me think of a question that, you know, with all these plans that have been prepared prior to this sub-area plan, do the residents, are they familiarized with those plans to see what has been planned for these areas, or are we just basically, they are, you're shaking your head?
We've actually included a lot of those plans on our website, and each of those plans that are appropriate for each sub-area plan are listed on the website, so that the public can have the opportunity to take a look at those. Specifically in the Newtown area, there was an Urban Land Institute study done. That's what initiated all of all of this process for that area, and also the change of the mixed-use zoning with the land development code. That is on there, and including a Candelas retail study. And I know that I've actually spoken to a few persons who have attended the meeting and have been happy to see that there have been people looking at that information and reading it in depth. So yes, we are including that on our website. And I will double check to make sure about the plans that Councilmember Pfeiffer had mentioned, but our plans are on there, and any area Arvada plans are on there as a link that they can take a look at.
Yeah, I don't know, is this one of your concerns, Councilmember Pfeiffer, that when we do this planning that it raises expectations too by the residents, that if they go through these plans that they're really having this input on and will have an effect on what is going to happen?
Yeah, I think they will, and I think that my concern is we're setting expectations, and it's kind of like you know, if it was a non-restricted funding source and we can do whatever, you know, whatever we could paint, we should go do. But sometimes the people that are participating in these activities don't understand that things can still change. It doesn't mean that we're really going to build this pedestrian bridge, or we're really going to make these nice walkable roads, or we're really going to make, you know, this connectivity in this park. It has no bearing. It can give us, and this is the fruitful conversation I just had with Ryan, is it has bearing on our future folks that are either working on the team or in city council. But at the end of the day, I don't know what the right answer is to make sure that folks understand that this could change. But if this was ideal in a point of time, like Ryan said, what would it look like today? And I don't know how you can make a clearer message than that. But my fear is the backlash. We've dealt with a few times on this dais with folks that have an impression from 10, 20 years ago, and it turns into a very decisive, you know, tough call for all of us, because we're torn between our predecessors and what was said by the previous teams, you know, from the city, and then who were the residents at the time, and then some are still holding on to some of that vision that might have been changed. I know that's a long answer, but it ties all into that, Ms. Ford.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jones.
We're just piling on here, but I agree with Mr. Pfeiffer. Most recent example is the arts and culture plan that was done. That just came up in a public hearing recently. And so it does create an expectation. So we just have to be thoughtful around why. The big question is, why are we doing this? And what's the ultimate goal for any document that we put forward, whether we're learning or trying to understand how to zone it or what might come in the future. And so we just have to be thoughtful around that and make sure that the messaging is clear that, yeah, this is a, whatever we call it. But it has come up, and I completely understand what you're saying, Bob.
Thank you. I don't see any more lights on.
Okay. Well, that concludes my presentation, and I really appreciate all the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you so much. Mr. Devon, next up, Payplan update.
Yes, we will have members of our Human Resources team present the Payplan update. I think Gabriella Bomber is going to, well, I think they're going to both come up, so here they are.
Can we just say yes and move on?
Hey, fine by me. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Okay, so we are here tonight to discuss the proposed updates to the 2022 pay plan. I know that in your packets you received a lot of detailed information. Gabrielle and I are going to work to summarize that for you this evening and ensure that we answer your questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, okay? Okay, next slide, please. As we do when we come to you every year, we make sure that we remind ourselves and all of us in the room that we use this total compensation philosophy as our guidance and our guiding principles as we update our pay plan every year. This total compensation philosophy has the three major pillars that includes us wanting to be an employer of choice, where we can attract and retain highly engaged and high-performing employees. We want to ensure that we have a competitive total compensation package that we offer to our employees that includes market-based salaries, comprehensive benefits for overall wellness, professional development, an inclusive work environment, and a focus on balancing work and life for our employees. Finally, the important piece of this philosophy is also maintaining a fiscally responsible approach to updating our pay plan every year. We want to make sure that we conservatively fund and we're able to fund these updates through the city's tenure model, and I am happy to say that our proposals and our recommendations for you this evening do just that. Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that we highlight the fact that we work to strategically align the work that we do with our total compensation philosophy and our pay plan updates in particular. As you can see on the slide, we follow our organizational and service effectiveness guiding principle, the City Council strategic result that's listed as well, and more specifically, our own HR strategic performance measure, where we try to ensure that at least 85% of our city's market-matched jobs are graded according to their market value. Currently, we are below that target. We're currently at 70%, but with the recommended updates that we're bringing to you this evening, we do look to restore our city's competitive market position and increase that outcome up to 86%. Next slide, please. So as we study things in the market, obviously we're looking at all of the current market conditions and challenges and trends. If you compare this to a weather forecast, we are currently in a highly competitive with a strong chance of turnover market. Essentially, it feels like the whole world is short-staffed. I'm sure all of you feel it in your own places of employment. We certainly feel it here in Arvada, and it is across our country. We're trying to determine where are all these applicants, where are all these qualified individuals, and based on research and what we're hearing from our fellow colleagues, as well as the analysis we've been doing, people are continuing to stay home. It might be due to COVID challenges, could be child care issues. Unemployment benefits are continuing for folks, and they're finding it more advantageous for their personal lives to stay at home. Part-time and flexible freelance opportunities have become more and more abundant, and people are taking advantage of what's called that gig economy. We're finding incredibly increased competition with employers, both in the public and private sector. Examples that include remoting from anywhere. You can live in Colorado and work for someplace in New York, and vice versa. Obviously, we're seeing people trying to attract those applicants with hiring bonuses, more paid time off, 4-day business weeks, examples that we have all seen, I'm sure, and it certainly is alive and well today. And then we're also very concerned about what we see as a shortage of skilled labor out there in the market. Those positions that we need for labor trades and crafts, those positions out in the field that are skilled, there's a significant shortage of those types of positions, and creating significant challenges for us because we have so many of those positions for Arvada. We're dealing with the national narrative regarding policing, the national narrative regarding government in general, overall distrust and feeling of lack of transparency at the national level, and that certainly trickles down to our local government. We're feeling those impacts as well. So those challenges we're certainly paying attention to, and all of those certainly lead what is considered a large increase in turnover. So next slide will show you what that looks like for us. In your packet, we have a slightly different figure as our current turnover. This is updated through the end of September, which is at 13.6%. We had 97 employees leave the city of Arvada so far through the end of September. 25% of those employees are sworn police employees. A third of those are retirements. It's even a little bit higher through today in October. We continue to see people leaving, so we're even inching closer to 14% turnover as we speak. You can see that trend, how things have changed in just the last 9 years, with the graph showing that we had barely over a 5% turnover rate in 2012 to what could be potentially a 15% turnover rate by the end of this year. Reasons that we're seeing based on exit interviews and discussions with employees, people are wanting a career change. I'm sure you've heard of the great resignation or the great reassessment that we're seeing across our country. A lot of that we see here with some of these people that are leaving as well. Retirements, of course. People want to relocate due to the cost of living. Compensation has been cited. People feel that based on the cost of living, they need to get paid more, so they leave employment. Workload itself has been a challenge. Promotion and advancement opportunities. Those are all reasons that we've heard are cited for the turnover that we're experiencing right now.
Ms. Haley, Councilmember Pfeiffer has a question.
Yes.
Are those in rank order? Like,
No.
no. So what would be the number one reason, if you could, or top three? I won't hold you to it.
The first one. Yeah.
Career
So
change.
not necessarily in rank order, but the top one is the first one.
And this,
The highest one.
what's the second?
Relocation is popping up. I think this remote from anywhere is providing more opportunities for people to leave and go live somewhere more affordable, but yet still work for a state that offers great wages. So
Where are they another state or just somewhere else in our state?
they're leaving the state. Many of them who are citing that reason are leaving Colorado.
And we don't, obviously, I don't think we hire anyone outside of the state. Have we ever, I mean, what's
Yeah,
our rules around where your residency is?
We currently do not hire outside of the state of Colorado. We're not really set up to manage multiple state employment laws. So although that is a question that we're facing as in terms of what can we do about this in the future.
Had there been any discussion around somebody working from Trinidad or
We will
somewhere
allow
else?
that if it's a remote job. But again, we're even still
Yeah.
asking ourselves, can jobs be 100% remote? Those are all questions we're facing
Okay.
currently. But if they can, we would allow that within the state of Colorado.
Okay, because I am hearing a lot of cities' growth. Trinidad, I'm actually driving down there tomorrow to talk to the mayor because the growth has exceeded about 200% for the town. Fort Morgan is the other one that's hitting 400% growth in their town, and everyone works for somewhere in Denver but lives out there. So I'm just curious if we're hearing that and if that's some potential, if that's in your discussion. I mean, any way to get quality employees that just can't afford to live in Denver area?
Yes, it definitely is part of our long-term vision and discussion right now.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Ford.
Is congestion an area of conversation as well? Because I think that as this area becomes more congested, I think we're going to see more people leaving for those areas where they can work remotely. And the other issue that I'm wondering as I'm listening to you speak, are we going to just, are the skilled labor jobs just going to or the lack of finding employees for those skilled labor jobs, is that going to increase exponentially unless we have some program, with like a Warren Tech or a Red Rocks Community College, somehow we're feeding those people into the local market, because I don't see where these people are coming from, well, we're not really building anything too much out of brick, but, you know, people with those types of skills, where are they coming from?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Councilmember Ford. We need to look at all of those options, and we are considering those options. We'll get into a little bit further what we're doing beyond just this pay plan update for 2022 as part of our total compensation philosophy and the update to that, as well as total rewards, everything and anything that can attract and retain quality employees. An example would also be for those skilled laborers, those skilled crafts and labor trades positions that we already have, how can we retain those employees who are highly skilled? Do we consider career models, things that we can add and enhance to the current salary and benefit structure that's in place? So all of that is what we're considering at this point. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So next slide, please. So with that, also as we study market conditions and trends, we do make sure that every year we take a look at nationally how are wages increasing in the market, regionally, as well as our own particular market. And when we look at the national figures, we use what's called the Employment Cost Index, or ECI. These figures that we have up here are for the last 2 years. And we're sharing that with you because, as you know, early last year, we did freeze our pay plan for the time being. So we are looking at last year's and this year's figures as a way of readjusting and catching up moving forward. So together for 2020 and 2021, it's a 6.1% increase nationally that we're seeing in wages. Regionally, we use the Employers Council survey data, and they indicated a 3.2% increase in wages in 2020 and a 3.2% increase, sounded like my microphone went out, I'm sorry, in 2021. For our own city market match jobs, we use Employers Council surveys, CML surveys, and what's called the Economic Research Institute survey data. And based on those salary surveys, our city's market match jobs showed that the market moved an average of 1.6% in 2020 and 3% in 2021 for a combined 4.6% market movement. The largest increases that we saw in this data include police, management, and executive positions. Next slide, please. And of course, another key piece of all the analysis that we do is to take a look at what our fellow municipalities are doing. This is just an overview of what we're finding some of our fellow competitors in other local governments that are doing. We do see an average of a planned increase for salaries of anywhere from 4 to 6%. Some agencies are offering hiring bonuses. You can see the Westminster Police Department announcement for lateral and certified police officers with a $10,000 signing bonus. Some entities are allowing more paid time off. The Juneteenth holiday is an example. Additional 457 retirement contributions, retiree health care options, 4-day business weeks, continual remote and hybrid schedules. All of those things are what our fellow municipalities are considering in one way or another. So knowing all of that and everything that we have in front of us as we move into 2022, what is it that we at the City of Arvada are trying to do to address that now and into the future? And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Gabriella to explain that. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Linda. Well, good evening again, council members. It's nice to see you. I will take off where Linda left off, and now that she's shared with us the incredibly competitive market conditions we're under currently, I'm going to share some of the things we're proposing and thinking about and considering, not just for 2022, but into the future as well. But I will start with the 2022 pay plan first, and some of the changes we've already made and the changes we're recommending for 2022. So, as Linda mentioned, if you'll recall, we came to you last year with a frozen pay plan, which meant that we didn't have market increases or step increases planned for 2021. We did this in earnest. We felt that our revenues might suffer from COVID-19 repercussions, and we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where we would need to furlough or lay off employees due to budget concerns. Luckily, and I think we're all fortunate to be here today, realizing that those projections did not materialize, and we were able to, with your support, reinstate some of those things that we did not do for 2021. So, your slide, let's see, does show that in 2021, we did reinstate step increases for our employees. We were able to do that in the spring. And so employees received their step increases on their anniversary date. And some of those were retroactive to January. And then we also, just this past September, were able to give a 1.5% salary range adjustment to all of our employees, with your support, of course. And those were funded out of the 2021 budget. So in essence, we caught up a little bit with the market conditions that we froze for 2021. So now, our efforts for 2022 are to catch up and set us up for success in 2022 to be able to continue our employer of choice position and continue to attract and retain our employees. So those market increases that Linda showed you, we're recommending adjusting our ranges to keep up with those changes. Those include market increases in the form of salary range adjustments for each of our job families. They're a little bit different depending on how the market moved for each. So for the police family, the sworn police officer family, we are recommending a 4% adjustment to that family as a whole, and a 3% adjustment for our information technology job family, and then 2.5% for all of our other families, which include our executives, management, professional, technical and business support, and then our labor, trades, crafts, and utilities. We also do have some additional recommendations for you this year that are they're a little bit outside of the norm that we normally do, but they're things we feel are very critical and important to maintaining our success. For example, our police officer ranges. I think you saw an example of what Westminster's top range is there, and we do feel we need to make an extra adjustment to the police officer's maximum pay in order to keep us in a very competitive position with our sister cities. So we are recommending an additional adjustment to the maximum of the police officer pay range of about 1.5%. And that will bring us back up to a competitive ranking with our cities that we compete with throughout the Denver-Boulder region. We are also attempting to address some competitive market pressure and internal compression issues for some of our supervisor jobs. So in your packets, you'll see that I did highlight a few pay grades in our management and executive job family, and we are looking and recommending to adjust those an additional 2.5%. This is to address both market condition pressure for these critical roles, but also some internal compression issues we've identified. Compression occurs in this particular instance. It's when a supervisor's pay, the difference between their pay and the people they manage is very little or not very meaningful. And as a philosophy at the city, we do try to keep a meaningful difference between what a supervisor earns and what their direct reports earn. And in some cases where our direct reports are earning overtime or there's very little difference between their grades, we do see compression. So in order to mitigate those issues, relax the compression, and set us up to avoid it in the future, we are requesting to recommend a 2.5% adjustment to just a few of the supervisor grades that have this compression issue. We are also recommending that for the direct department heads who are in the Exec 7 pay grade of the executive job family. That is, most of our department heads are also, they're starting to face compression issues, but they're also falling behind the market in terms of their salary ranges. So this additional increase will bring them back up to a competitive place. Let's see. We are also recommending 32 reclassifications. These are reclassifications occur when jobs change significantly. This can happen over time as jobs evolve and new duties are added or responsibilities or requirements like certifications and things like that. or it can happen as a result of a reorganization or a vacancy where jobs are changed. So when jobs change over time or due to a vacancy, or they see an incredible substantial change in the market over time, we do recommend reclassification to the appropriate grade. And all of these changes that I just shared with you are what gets us back to our performance measure target, which Linda mentioned earlier. Okay? So all of those things add up to a pay increase or an increase to our payroll budget of about 3.47%. I recognize this is over budget. We have 3% budgeted in our 2022 budget for these types of increases. And so we are just short of 0.5% above what the budget allows. In consultation with the city manager's office and with finance, the Arvada team feels very strongly that we need to make these changes to position us back, competitive in the market, and we are committed to finding alternative resources to fund these increases. Do you have any questions for me about this before I move on? Okay, next slide, please.
All right, you prompted a question from Councilmember Marriott, and I see him doing math over here, so I know it's going to be a hard one.
Not hard at all. The question I have is, last year and this year appear to be very different than all the years I've been here. You can call them both anomalies, both in two different ways, right? From freezing pay to then the following year an incredibly tight job market. Do we worry at all about, with these proposed changes, overshooting the market? In other words, jumping into a bubble, and if the labor market were to change, we've already, moved into the bubble and it's too late to move. Or maybe another question would be, in you guys' experience, has the pay plan ever gone down? I would suspect no, but that would be a response if that was the case, that we kind of operated into a bubble and then the bubble went away.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I haven't personally experienced a time when the market went negative yet, but when I first got hired here, we were in a recession, and I know that we froze the pay plan at that point to keep it static and not advance further than the market dictated. So we do have options like that to keep us where we should be. So the increases that are proposed to you today are pretty conservative. I actually, in my heart, I wanted to do probably 25% more than what I'm presenting to you today. But knowing that there is anomalies in this market, and we can't account for the unpredictability of what these conditions are going to do to us in the next 1 to 2 years, I did, the conservative approach is to stay above average, but not go too far ahead of everyone else, because that's not our philosophy. So if we did overstep the mark, we would then make corrections in the following years. So we wouldn't, I don't foresee us ever doing a negative range adjustment, but we would likely very small adjustments, or we would freeze adjustments to keep us on pace. And sometimes we do reclassify jobs down when job duties or market changes significantly for individual positions. So we do have that option as well.
All right, we've got a couple more here. Councilmember Pfeiffer's up next.
Sure.
So remind me, is this across the board pay raises, or is it also based on their performance review? Is there some tie-in to that?
These increases that we just talked about are across all the job families, so everyone would experience this. It's really more bringing them forward to where the market is currently. And then we also have step increases, which I'll talk about next, which actually the slide is up on the screen now.
So are the step adjustments, maybe I just never connected the dots, but is the step adjustment associated to their performance review?
Yes.
Okay. So I always thought it might have been a classification change in their step that would have caused it, but now I'm following a little bit better. So the steps is where they get their performance. So
exactly. So each pay range has a series of steps, and people come into that range depending on their qualifications, and then they move up a step every year based on their performance. and their contributions to the city until they reach the top.
Step. A little bit different. And so the other question I have is around your compression concerns. I've seen this in a couple of different areas, and I'm not sure if it's affecting us or not, but I haven't heard you bring it up. But, you know, a few years ago, the state legislators passed equal pay for equal work.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm not saying we have an issue here or not around that, but did we find ourselves maybe at a little odd with that, and is that what's caused some oddities in our compressions and ranges, is kind of normalizing to that and maybe addressing some of those concerns that might be hidden within that act?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
good answer.
Well, that's good to know, because
Yeah.
I'm glad we're paying attention to that, because to me, I'm passionately advocate for that.
Absolutely.
So I just was wondering if we're just right sizing. It sounds like that's what we're trying to do now, is also kind of course
Yes.
correct that as well, and make sure the pay is
Fair.
correct. And I do agree a supervisor should make more, and I know there's places where supervisors make equal or less than what their direct reports do, and so I'm glad you're also addressing that as well. So I just wanted to confirm my thoughts around the compression. All right.
Yes, and we're definitely looking at it much more closely now due to the Equal Pay Act. We do want to make sure we address, especially in areas where there's gender or minority issues concerned. We will absolutely always try to correct those. And then we also have a philosophy that we want to be fair to all of our employees.
Right.
So
right.
we look at all of them.
You have to balance it. Is that something you also train does your supervisor set your salaries, or is that set by a salary analysis by HR?
It's a partnership. We collaborate with them on the fair and appropriate offer to make, and then each year their salaries can go up by a step, and then managers do advocate for employees who perform above and beyond to receive an additional step or something to that effect.
Okay. I wish I asked those questions like 10 years ago. I would have probably learned a lot more. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Jones.
Just a quick question on kind of a follow-up to Mr. Marriott on, you know, if you overshoot, and this is obviously the worst case scenario, but would you also use a reduction in force to also equalize? So if you were, let's just say you were healthy in one department, and to bring kind of the average pay down, you could do it with one less person. Would you look at
It's definitely an option. Probably not our number one go-to, but it's an option.
So if by reclassifying the family, or I'm not saying this right,
The jobs,
but
yeah.
reclassifying the jobs family, does that essentially do the same thing as if you were to reduce the workforce?
It depends on how many. So a job family is made up of multiple people, and if you freeze that family and there are no increases, essentially you're leaving room for other families to increase differently. But a reduction in force would be more of an individual situation where we would look at positions individually as far as what they're contributing to the organization and where we could reallocate those resources. So those would be some very research-heavy decisions that we would make before we made a decision like that.
Yeah, that's obviously the last
Yes.
choice on the list of things. So, okay, I was just curious, because looking back at the graph, I noticed like in 2015, you had a real big reduction in force, and I was just curious if you were market correcting that, or what was the situation then?
That was the Arvada Center spinoff.
Oh, of course it was.
Yeah, most of the RIFs are due to spinoffs of some sort.
Okay, no, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Sure.
I was reading too much into it.
No problem. All right, so we're on the slide about step increases, and as I mentioned, those are the way that the city rewards our employees for their continuing contributions and commitment to the organization. We have approximately 71% of our employees who are eligible for steps in 2022. 52% of them are sworn officers, and the rest are civilian, 77% civilian. So continuing to offer those steps will impact a majority of our workforce, and those step increases are budgeted at 1.35%. In addition, we do have a few title changes that we make. We do this kind of a cleanup every year where we want to make sure the way jobs are titled not only makes sense and appropriately represent the job, but that they're also a really big morale booster for employees. They have a lot of investment in what their jobs are titled, so we do give opportunities to fix titles each year, and we did 9 this year. And then also as part of the budget process, we did include 27 net new positions. My number is just a little bit different because we're just doing housekeeping and making sure we account for jobs that were removed, jobs that were added, positions that have been transferred from one department to another, or sometimes jobs get divided up and reallocated to different areas. And so our housekeeping number is just a little bit different. All right. Let's see. If there are no questions about the 2022 pay plan, I will move on and talk a little bit about the other reconsiderations we are making and looking at for 2022 and beyond. So if we could advance to we'll skip this slide, thank you. So a couple of announcements I'd like to make that I'm super proud of. We are once again experiencing amazing healthcare claims experience thanks to our employees and all their efforts to stay healthy. We are increasing our healthcare premiums by 0% once again for 2022. This is the 3rd year in a row if you're counting. We're doing really great. So I'm super excited about that. But what I'm even more excited about is the next bullet, which is we are partnering with our amazing Everside Clinic to introduce mental health care services through the clinic. We will actually be engaging with the clinic and hiring a dedicated mental health care provider who will be available to all of our employees who are members of Everside, and they'll be able to access quality mental health care, which is really needed right now. I'm super excited about this because it's a passionate area of mine, but also I think it's going to put us in a really great leading position in the market as leaders in this area. We're also able to make a few other changes, including increasing our police life insurance benefit. Up until now, it's been a flat $150,000. We have been able to increase it to 2 times the officer's salary or $150,000, whichever is greater. So we've made that change as well. Something we continue to work on is those career progression models. Linda mentioned a little bit earlier, and in addition to your comments, Councilmember Ford, I think it was you who said, this labor shortage that we're having. So one of the things the city is embarking on is partnerships with our community colleges, but also the high schools. We're going to the high schools. We're partnering with the Chamber of Commerce on plans to engage these high school students early on about these types of trade careers that they can enter. If they're not able to or wanting to go to college, they can pursue these other opportunities. And so what career models do is it builds a framework for the city to bring these individuals in at an entry-level, basic level of skill and knowledge and grow them from within. So we grow our own, we develop them over time, and they have a career path that they can follow throughout their years here, which promotes retention. And so we are continuing to build and develop those models throughout several of our positions, our labor groups. That is something that is already in place today, and we're just continuing to build on that further and develop those partnerships. Future considerations, we are looking into additional things that we see our other competition doing, such as retirement contributions and healthcare options for retirees. We are studying what other cities are doing with Juneteenth as a holiday, and we'll bring you recommendations about that soon. We are also keeping an eye out for upcoming legislation, which will be enacted soon, including the family law, which is about family leave, paid family leave provided through the state. As a city, we are not required to participate in this, but our employees can opt in. So we do have to have a plan for how we're going to manage this, this new requirement. We are also continuing to study the 4-day business week. And all of these things really are part of our overall project on total rewards and philosophy We do have an active AIP, or Action Initiative project, as a leadership team to reinvent and update our total rewards philosophy and the strategies behind it. So we're in an active project now, and I will show you a timeline of where we've been and where we're going forward. If you could go to the next slide, please.
We've got all kinds of questions going on up
Okay.
here. We got lights
Yes.
going crazy up here. So let me just say I love this slide. This is my favorite slide. And you know, as a city, we dream big and deliver, and I think we can dream and deliver even bigger here if we're going to keep up with the gig economy. You know, I think things like floating days off and remote work, 4-day work week, flex time, you know, flex hours, different vacation strategies like floating days off instead of, you know, if you don't want to take one holiday, you can, you know, do a different day, your birthday off, something fun and exciting that will make people sit up and smile, because sometimes it's not always the 1% pay increase, but the coolness of having an employee handbook that says I get my birthday off. So just love the philosophy around that, and hoping the future considerations aren't too far in the future. So with lights lit up, Councilmember Simpson, you're up next.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to echo, I really love this slide. 0% healthcare increases for 3 years in a row. That's amazing. Congratulations, you guys. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Particularly coming out of a pandemic. I'm genuinely impressed at that. The mental health care provider, that is so tremendously important, particularly after the events, the pandemic, the events of what happened in June, the stress that has been to the city staff in general. So I think that's incredibly important, not just for those who may be experiencing a crisis for whatever reason, but even just as a wellness check. And that is an investment we can make into our people that in turn helps them stay healthy, and that just causes all kinds of benefits across the spectrum. So really, really well done there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everything is great. I think it's all good. I just wanted to call out those particular things because I feel like taxpayers may not realize what a tremendous benefit that is to them, because if we can keep our workforce healthy, if we can keep them on the job, then we don't have the negative repercussions of having people in crisis. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Marriott.
Thank you. I just had one question about this slide, and I'll echo the great job on the healthcare thing. That's amazing. With the upcoming family law, and the city's in a very different position than a lot of small businesses are that don't have the choice to opt out. It's forced on them, but the city's different. But for city employees who do opt into that, does the city, have we started talking yet about a plan of whether the city or the taxpayers suck that up, or whether we charge the employee for that? Or it seems like there's a philosophical discussion to be had there before, you know, earlier the better.
Yeah, we do plan to start studying that law in depth this coming January. We have 1 year, I think, to prepare for the enactment. As far as from my research, if an employee opts in, they will pay their share through a payroll deduction. The city doesn't pay a share, so it does come out of the employee's pocket, if you will, if they choose to opt in.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Just curious, do we offer like EcoPass or any of those other kind of things to promote?
We do offer, well, we don't offer it, no, not as a city benefit. It is available to purchase. And we have actually discussed adding a pre-tax purchase benefit of that. It's going to be part of our total rewards study. So what we're gonna do, if you don't mind, I'm kind of getting into my next slide, but
Nope, go for it.
we are going to survey our employees to make sure we understand what they want and what's most of value to them. And once we know that, if something like that ranks high on the list, we would bring it up for an opportunity for discussion amongst all the other things.
Yeah, just as much as you were, I don't know when it was, 5-10 years ago, or it was not that long, but when you did the creativity and the innovation around the health plan, I remember when you all came and presented it, It was very innovative. You found how to get through, I think, the prior year. I know I was vocal and some of the other council members about the health care was getting way out of control. You came back and proposed something that now we're continue to reap the benefits. I'm just wondering if you can reach into those innovative minds again and just trying to find a new way to surround the employees with excitement. And I'm not saying Eagle Pass is one of them, because I'm not saying that, but, you know, Google Fly something, or, you know, make it where it's a fun workplace, or doing, like, I like the birthday idea. Was that you, Dot, that said that? Or you know, they get family passes to Waterworld for, you know, just something that makes us different, but we value the family in which you're joining. Because we do spend a lot of time in our employer, if not sometimes more with our employer than we do sometimes with our families.
Absolutely.
And so if there's some unique, innovative way to create some excitement, and I agree, it's not always money in the pocket, it's nice, but is there somewhere where you feel proud to come into the office, or you're proud to be part of a team that just makes it where word of mouth is just like, gosh, this place is the best place to work, and this is why they, I don't know, you know, they put sleep pods in the main area. I don't know.
Yeah,
But-
actually, that's one of the reasons we're switching from total compensation to total rewards, because we recognize that how you experience your work and your life here at work is about more than just pay and benefits. It's about all the different things that you experience when you come to work for the city, and that includes things like your birthday off, or a chance to choose a different day off versus the traditional holiday, or you know, something that's important to you. There's so many things available out there, and so for us to be able to study all of them, rank them in terms of priority, and then just figure out how we can fund some of these creative things, that's all part of the Total Rewards philosophy project that we're embarking on.
Yeah, and I appreciate you reaching out to the employees, but they only know what they know. They don't, like, I'm just throwing things out. I'm not saying you'll do it, but if you knew that people can get family passes for $5 for the whole summer, that's something that they didn't know is in the realm of the conversation, so they may not put that into a survey. Yeah. So, you know, anything that your team can do to be creative and innovative, it would be awesome, because I think there's an opportunity here to seize it without a huge financial impact on anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll keep
right.
that in mind, because the workforce of the future wants passes to water.
Yeah, it's work-life balance. I mean, at the end of the day,
Yes.
it's work-life balance. And if we're really promoting and we're really serious about work, I think we're all having mic problems. If we're all serious about work-life balance, then we should mix that into this conversation. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is a fun little slide.
We
I'd
do
like
have
to
one
show.
more.
Yes.
We're still lit up
No,
over here.
sorry about that. No problem.
Councilmember Ford.
I just want to ask you this question. I've been reading that more women are staying home from the workforce. Are you finding that here, that we're having less female applicants?
Yes, we are experiencing less applicants altogether. So it's difficult for us right now to say there's a difference between female and male, because it's just low all around. But everything I've researched does say that women are choosing to stay home for various reasons. Linda mentioned some of them in an earlier slide. Challenges around childcare, not just affordability, but availability of childcare, and also concerns about COVID, and not just, you know, the spread of or the threat of exposure, but even just the discomfort of having to come to a workplace and wear a mask all day and things like that. So I can't say that right now I see a gender-specific disruption, but it's across the board. Sure. Any other questions?
I think you're good to move on.
Okay. So this slide just speaks to why it's important that we look at everything and we look at it with a vision for the future. The last time we updated our total compensation philosophy was 10 years ago. And as you can see, 10 years ago, our population, our workforce was mostly boomers, and a few millennials were entering the workforce at that time. We had a turnover rate of 5.7%. And then we had a retirement tsunami And which brings us to today. We've got just 20% boomers, and we're seeing the millennials taking over. And some Gen Z are starting to enter the workforce. If you're not familiar with the generations, Gen Z are very young adults. They're in their teen and young adults, I think up to age 25 at this point. We have 13% turnover, and 22% of us are eligible for retirement. So if you do the math, that's most of our boomers and some of our Xers as well that might retire. So that brings us to 10 years from now, where we'll see a huge difference in what our workforce looks like. And we'll even start seeing some alphas come into play for some of our seasonal jobs, I think. That's the next generation. Those are our 6-year-olds right now. So we need to get ready for that next generation, and mostly for the millennials and Gen Z, who are going to be our majority workforce. I'm an Xer myself. I don't want to forget our generation. We're important too. We're still 30% of the workforce, so we count. We matter.
We've maintained a third through all of these stats.
Yes, that's true.
Latchkey
We're
right
solid.
here.
Yeah,
Latchkey.
exactly.
But anyway, this is illustrating why it's important that we not only prepare for the future, but that we ask them, that we understand what they value. So that gets us to our next slide, please. So we are currently in the process. This is a 3 to 5 year project for us. Currently, it's in phases, our AIP for total rewards. We spent 2020 just trying to achieve compliance with our new state laws, including equal pay and paid sick leave acts, and we did it. We are in compliance, and we're doing well. In 2021, we completed a job evaluation process where we created a framework to internally evaluate the value of jobs so that we could combine internal value with the market value and make sure we grade jobs fairly and equitably across the organization. We are in the process of completing that project now, and we'll hope to be done by the end of this year. And then that will bring us into phase 2, which is all about research, data collection, benchmarking, and more. So if the next slide, please, will illustrate the timeline we have at play for the rest of this project. So you can see there for the end of this year, we do plan to survey our employees to address Councilmember Pfeiffer's thoughts. We're not just asking them what they want, but we're also providing them with a list of all the things out there that are considered rewards. And we're asking them to let us know which ones matter most to them. So we'll be doing that towards the end of this year. And then in first quarter, second quarter of 2022, we will be surveying our competitors, our market, for what they offer, all of the different elements of total rewards that we're collecting data on. And we're going to benchmark ourselves to see where we stand compared to all of our sister cities, and to what extent we can get information from the private sector. We will benchmark ourselves against them as well. Once we've collected all this data, we will bring it to the leadership team, and we will start studying all of our options, deciding, for example, what position do we want to hold in the market? Is the position and philosophy we currently have still hold, or do we want to do something different? The balance of pay and benefits and other rewards, what should that look like? What do we want to reward? What do we want to pay for? How do we fund it? All of these things will be discussed. We will bring you updates as we go through these discussions. This could take a while. I have it listed for third and fourth quarter of 22, but I also know this could take longer, so I do have a little statement about that there. But once we go through all this work and we determine the answers, then we will begin to design and deploy our new programs. So our hope is that by 2023, we will be able to start deploying some of these great ideas. And with that is the end of my part of the presentation. So we'll take more questions now, Linda and I, if you have some for us.
Councilmember Marriott.
Thank you. So not really a question, just a comment. One of the things that historically has always been kind of the common wisdom, whether it's been true or not is another matter, but was that when you went to work in government, you probably didn't make the highest pay, but you had really good benefits and you had good working conditions, or maybe less demands than the private sector might demand out of you. And as my experience in being on council now and approving these pay plans is that some of that's not really true. That one, I think the pay is not substandard pay compared to the private sector. I don't think the benefits are substandard to the private sector either. In fact, they're probably, on average, I would guess, better than the private sector. I think the job's demanding, though. I think city employees work as hard as anybody in the private sector and produce as much. So maybe some of that is warranted. And I know within this pay plan we have a look at total compensation, not just pay. But I just want to make sure that as we go along, we always look at compensation being pay and benefits, and maybe even some of the benefits that are a little harder to quantify, and make sure as we're doing that we're doing it with an eye towards every reality, and not just the tech company or those top 10 Fortune 500 employers, but that we look at the other employers that are in our community too, so that we reflect our community, and just make sure. I just want to make sure that we always keep that in mind, that we need to, this plan needs to match and mirror our community. We don't want to get out ahead of where our community is. And I don't have any reservations that we do at this point, but to me it's always just a caution going forward that as we do these, particularly when we look at this last slide here where we're undertaking a multi-year project to look at our total philosophy and whatnot, that we just keep kind of both sides of the equation in mind, and make sure that along the way we have some of these discussions about total compensation and about our compensation philosophy. There certainly was a time where being an employer of choice was what was thought of to be the thing to do. Is that really still the case now or not? So I think those are all questions I'd like to see us talk about as we go forward over the next couple of years.
Would you like me to answer was that a real question or just?
I think that was a statement. That wasn't. I'm not sure there was a question in there. So I appreciate you standing there and listening.
He was being philosophical. And Councilmember Pfeiffer.
I'll swing the other way, because I went from private sector to government work and be a public servant. I took a 30% pay cut to do that. Now that's my choice, and yeah, I think the benefits are well. But when I reflect here at the City of Arvada, I think that there's an expectation of having a professional organization, a professional police department, professional employees, and with that comes expectations. And for us to have that level of professionalism that I'm very proudful of, we have to be the employer of choice, because you know why? We represent the people up here, and we, the people, believe that that's what our city team should be performing at. I strongly believe that you pay for what you get. And if we want to be the top place to work, then we need to compensate as such. And we don't need to be a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is, in the front range, are we an employer of choice out of all of our, government agencies that work around us? Mm-hmm. And do we create an environment that's inviting and we retain employees? I think we forget about the cost of retention. I think we didn't bring that up, and some people up here may need to understand that retention is very, very important for a couple of reasons. There's non-financial and financial, and then training somebody new to replace that person. It takes back the position when you have a single-threaded organization, because I could bet that there are single-threaded individuals peppered throughout the entire organization, and you lose that one person, and it will set us back a decade, because we've lost the person, we didn't take care of the person, they were a good employee, they had all the knowledge, and then just the cost of impact to the community for that person leaving. So I would encourage exactly what you're doing, which is being innovative and creative and focusing on how you could, better our community to meet our expectation. We expect top shelf, and when we don't, we pout over it, right? We get upset, and we demand it. I mean, that's, you hear it from us. And guess what? That out of all the cities I've been around and the mayors I've seen and the city staff throughout the state in my state job, I will tell you, I get so excited to come back, and then when I interact with the teams that are here, it's top shelf. I don't think that anyone appreciates it until you go meet with, I'm meeting with Dillon, I'm meeting with Trinidad, I'm meeting with all these little towns, I'm meeting the Front Range, and it's night and day. We are spoiled here, and that's a good thing because our citizens expect it. Because every time we come in here, I feel like we're appreciated, and we're customer oriented, and we're servant leadership oriented. And that is important to me, and we need to pay for that. And I'm not saying everything under the sun, it's not like the pay is unlimited, but what you're doing and the approach and the thoughtfulness and the research and to get us here, that's why we hire you all, to get us to a point where it is thoughtful, and it helps us make a good, sound decision around the pay and our pay philosophy. So I think it's a great job. I get excited every year because you guys do a great job.
Thank you.
And I keep going, keep knocking it out of the park.
We will. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, and I do, before I forget, a couple of slides ago I meant to say, I'm quite sure that the Chamber would help you with a survey with the private sector and the benefits and packages that they put together for their teams. So I've got a few more lights up here. Councilmember Simpson is up next.
Thank you. I actually wanted to agree with my colleague, Councilmember Pfeiffer. I think maybe a little more succinctly, I think you guys just do